Hi guys, Craig Swan with another edition of Short and Sharp. It's not so much a whiteboard session today as a sort of a fireside chat almost, because I'm aware that in this current environment, a lot of you, my colleagues, are out there being required to improve or spend more time prospecting. And for many of you, that is going to mean cold calling, which is often seen as something that people try and avoid and is difficult and is unpleasant. Now, for my part, I have had my fair share of cold call prospecting throughout my career, and some of that related to real estate, some of it was not real estate. But during that time, I have come across some points and some good information and some inspiration as well. So I thought I'd share with you today what I call the Craig Swan School of Home-Spun Cold Calling philosophy. So I'm hoping that it might be of some use to you. So I'm going to go through 10 points with you, and then I'm going to share with you some other useful information that will sort of add to what I'm saying. So my first 10 points about efficient or effective cold calling would be: 1, don't make excuses. So if you're going to cold call, set aside the time, make the calls, get on with the jobs. But the more you procrastinate, the more unpleasant it'll be and the less enjoyable and efficient it'll probably also be. The next point that I focus on is to know my audience. So I do homework sufficient that I can identify who they are and I can mentally picture who I'm speaking to. It's very important that I have that mindset, that I know who it is that I want to talk to, who will I be talking to. Another point that I rank highly is that I need to know my patter. Now, I refer to it as a patter. I don't like the word script, frankly, because it sounds very automatic to me. But so know what it is you're going to talk about. Know in your mind what your opening is, what your middle is, so to speak, and how you're going to end, and what is the outcome you want from that initial prospecting. You need to understand what is the end result. And that sort of leads to the next point about metrics. So understand what you're trying to achieve in the amount of time. You've got 1 hour to make these calls or to do whatever prospecting you're doing, but let's assume it's cold calling. How many calls can you make? How many calls do you need to make? How long do these calls take? What is the likely close rate? How many calls are you expecting to make to get a certain result? So, work on the metrics. It may not be obvious initially, but over time, you've got to know your numbers, okay? Basically know your numbers. The next point, that's point number 5, is to start well. I have this saying in my head that well begun is half done. So if you can start well, start big, start confident, depending on what you're doing. And also in that same point is don't expect to be rejected. Don't have the mindset that you're interrupting people. You've got to have the mindset that you're bringing a service and a product, and what you're saying is relevant and important. And you don't expect, he's going to tell me to he's not busy, or he is busy, I should say, and not to disturb him. So be confident. Don't expect a rejection. Point number 6 is to be careful or mindful of your language. Pick the style of language that you think is going to match the audience. If the audience, talks and thinks in a certain way, then adjust your language to match that. There's no point in being above your audience. There's no point in being below your audience. And in that same regard, and it kind of leads to point number 8 that I'm going to talk about now, is be mindful of your tone. And that, what is the tone that you're sounding like? And that would also include the rate at which you speak. So there's going to be times when you want to speak faster, and there's going to be times when you want to be slower. Overall, it's usually better to speak slowly and clearly. But I'm not saying it's always going to work, but that all relates to who is your audience, have you done your homework, what is your message, how slowly or quickly should you speak, what type of language should you be using. Point number 8, I would suggest to you, would be to become the master of open questions. In other words, avoid closed questions. Yes, no questions are not going to help you. You're trying to navigate a pathway with this prospect, and you need to get them to talk to you. They got to open up a little bit for you to understand what it is that's going to make them come with you. And they are naturally going to want to, more than likely, not give away that information. So you have to work on the art of opening them up and getting them to come with you. And the way you do that is to get them to talk about themselves, which is essentially a reaction to an open-ended question. Now, point number 9 in my book, in the Craig Swan philosophy of cold calling, is to speak with a smile. I work with people, some of whom are very good at the sort of cold prospecting, right? And they would typically have a big circle in front of them, facing them as they spoke, and there would be a big smile, a big smiley face. And you cannot but react to a smiley face with a smile. And if you smile, you will find, obviously, that you are going to speak in a different way, and there will be a different tone to your voice. And so remember, speak with a smile, and if you possibly can, enjoy what you're doing. Now, cold calling generally is not something that most people find enjoyable, but you will be surprised if you do it with discipline and you set aside the time and you make sure that you are constantly on there. And look, to do this successfully, you need to follow up. So you need to be doing it all the time. So I would suggest that if you can develop an enjoyment of it, then you're going to go a lot better. And the big one, number 10, the big one, without question, if there's nothing you take away from this fireside chat, it's this, okay? The fortune is in the follow-up. If you do not follow up, and follow-up is a big space, we're not saying it has to be a certain way, but if you don't follow up those initial contacts you make, you have wasted your time. Somebody else will benefit from what you've done. The fortune is in the follow-up. Now, that last comment that I've made, number 10, fortune in the follow-up, is I attribute that particular phrase to someone who made a very big impact on me when I was doing a lot of cold calling type prospecting. His name is Jim Rohn, R-O-H-N. He's an American businessman, coach, business philosopher. Sadly, he's passed away. I think he passed away in 2009. But I am a huge fan of Jim Rohn, and I watch as much as I can of him and listen as much as I can to him wherever I can. And he had a classic phrase that he used to live by, if you want, or sort of a mantra, and it goes something like this. I might not have the words exactly right, but it goes something like this: don't wish things were easier. Wish that you were better. Don't wish for there to be less problems. Wish that you had more skills. Don't wish for less challenges. Look for more opportunity to show some wisdom. So, you can always change these negatives to a positive. And flowing from that as well, these little phrases that I keep in my head, some of my favorites are, some will, some won't. Who cares who's next? Some will, some won't. Who cares who's next? It's a numbers game. It's don't get offended by people who say no. And often I use the phrase in my head, no doesn't mean no forever. It means no right now. It could mean that it's not suitable right now. It doesn't mean to say it's no forever. And so that keeps you positive. And that also says, well, why don't I follow up on that person? Because he said no then, but it's not no forever. Another one that I work by is every no that I come across is obviously going to lead me closer to a yes. So, no, I've got to be closer to a yes, so let's keep on going. And finally, I also, and I've sort of mentioned this earlier in the chat that we're having here, but I imagine in my head when I'm doing the cold calling that I'm looking for the person who will say to me, where have you been? I've been looking for you for so long. Your service or your product, how come I haven't come across it before? That's what you're looking for. You cannot, not everyone you contact is going to convert into something beyond a prospect initially, unless, of course, more will if you follow up. But you are looking for, you're flipping rocks, aren't you? You're looking for the aces in the pack. And you've got to go through quite a few cards to get your 4 aces. But once you get those 4 aces, then, on you go. And you go back and you revisit that pack of cards if you wish. And there'll be more aces in there because you've done some follow-up. So guys, I'm hoping that hasn't been something that you might have heard before. Maybe some of the aspects you have. As I said, it's the Craig Swan School of Cold Calling Philosophy. If you found that interesting, I'd be very happy and curious to know. Let me know what your thoughts are. So until we meet again, take care of yourself.